Time now for the front page. This is a digest of news since yesterday's broadcast and this very morning after we slept. The Israeli-Hamas war continues to lead the news. Hezbollah leader will address his followers today. Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of the Lebanese Shia Islamist group Hezbollah, is expected to address his followers today, his first public comments since the Israeli-Hamas war broke out. The speech is likely to indicate the group's next moves as its fighters and the Israeli army are engaged in intense attacks on the Lebanon-Israeli border. This has raised fear the area could become another front for the conflict. So far, however, the violence has largely been contained. Since Hamas carried out the 7th October attacks on Israel, killing more than 1,400 people, Lebanon has been on edge, closely watching and being watched by Hezbollah. The BBC is reporting that the IDF has said that it is deployed and ready near the Lebanese border, ahead of a speech planned shortly from the head of Hezbollah. Israeli military spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht said the Israeli Defense Forces are deployed and ready in the north, adding that we are in a defensive posture. We are saying to the Lebanese people, do not sacrifice your future for Hamas. Hezbollah is a Shia Muslim organization that is both politically influential and in control of the most powerful armed force in Lebanon. The movement was established in the early 1980s by the region's most dominant Shia power, Iran, to oppose Israel, whose forces occupied southern Lebanon during the country's civil war. CBS News reports that Secretary of State Blinken has arrived in Tel Aviv as Israel says its troops have surrounded Gaza City. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Israel today to press for more humanitarian aid to be allowed into besieged Gaza, while the Israeli military said its troops tightened their encirclement of Gaza City, the focus of Israel's campaign to crush the enclave's ruling Hamas group. On the northern border with Lebanon, tensions continue to escalate ahead of a speech planned by Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah in his first public comments since Hamas attacked Israel last month, stoking fears the conflict could widen into a regional one. Secretary Blinken came with a message. Israel was ready with a response, this being reported from the BBC. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken came to Tel Aviv to tell Israeli leaders they needed to do more to minimize civilian casualties in Gaza. Israeli leaders were ready with a response. Standing before a press cameras in the historic home of Israeli founding father David Ben-Gurion, President Isaac Herzog shook Blinken's hand and held up flyers that he had provided, a warning to Palestinians in Gaza that they were in an area that was targeted for an impending Israeli attack. Quote, "The shelters in northern Gaza and Gaza District are not safe," said the flyers. Hamas and the terror organizations operate from within those shelters, hospitals, and schools in the area. Therefore, your presence in these are not safe. Blinken responded by reiterating that while Israel has a right to self-defense, how Israel does this matters. A California woman is suing the Departments of State and the Department of Defense. This is because she's upset with the way that they have not evacuated Americans in Gaza. This being reported by Arca Max. An 81-year-old Daly City, California grandmother is suing the U.S. Secretaries of State and Defense, claiming they are violating the U.S. Constitution by not evacuating Palestinian Americans from the besieged Gaza Strip. A relative of the woman, her name is Dina Besizo, is a Bay Area resident. Her family is disappointed that the U.S. government has left one of her own family members stranded despite her U.S. citizenship. When we are lucky enough to get her on an airplane, she tells us how scared she is by the time that she's evacuated. It might be too late for her. The woman tried to cross into Egypt from Gaza in recent weeks. Egyptian authorities turned her away, according to the lawsuit. Neither Arcamax nor the Wells report will reveal the identity of this woman over concerns by her family and lawyers that she could be targeted by the Israeli military. U.S. veterans, for their part, are helping to evacuate Americans from Gaza. This being reported by the Washington Post. The successful departure from Gaza into Egypt of 5 American aid workers, that happened yesterday, was orchestrated with a considerable help behind the scenes from a small group of U.S. military veterans who rushed to Israel as its military response to Hamas's cross-border attacks trapped hundreds of other Americans in the violence. The veterans, former Special Operations Group who played a similar role during the U.S. evacuation of Afghanistan 2 years ago, were the women's lifeline to safety, one of the aid workers, Emily Callahan, said yesterday. They worked to keep the aid workers informed of efforts to extract them, shared survival techniques, and saw to it that they were put on a list ensuring their entry into Egypt. Two veteran-run organizations, the Special Operations Association of America and Save Our Allies, sent roughly 24 members into Israel and Egypt after the October 7th Hamas attack to support evacuations, this according to Alex Plitzis, an SOAA board member, who, by the way, is supporting his volunteers from his home in the United States. President Biden is getting some pressure from the Democrat Party over his stance with Israel. This from USA Today. 2 days after a Democratic Jewish group launched an ad praising President Joe Biden as a steadfast friend and supporter of Israel, the president was challenged at a Democrat Party fundraiser about his approach to the Israeli-Hamas war. Mr. President, if you care about Jewish people, as a rabbi, I need you to call for a ceasefire right now, said the woman, who identified herself as Jessica Rosenberg. Palestinians and Israelis have died. Please explain to me why. Biden is getting increasingly squeezed by his own party, by those who want him to stand strong behind Israel after the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, and those warning the Palestinian people are at risk of annihilation. Without meaningful changes in policy, Othman Atta, an attorney and executive editor of the Islamic Society of Milwaukee, said of President Biden, quote, "We're just not going to be voting for him," unquote. Atta is among some 1,500 voters who have signed on to the statement being circulated by the Arab, Muslim, and progressive groups, declaring they won't back Biden in 2024 unless he ends his support for Israel's war in the Gaza Strip. Out of the UN, a former UN speechwriter has called the organization an abject failure. This from Fox News. The United Nations is calling for a ceasefire after Hamas launched attacks on Israel last month to show the organization is an abject failure, according to a policy expert and former UN speechwriter. The United Nations was founded in the wake of the Holocaust for the purpose of preventing atrocities and to maintain international peace and security. By that standard of its own mission, the United Nations is an abject failure. Israel had just endured the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. The gruesome nature of the atrocities is unlike anything seen since the Holocaust, said Aviva Klompus. She was speaking to Fox News. Klompus is the co-founder and CEO of Boundless Israel, which is described as a think-action tank that identifies and addresses system-wide challenges preventing organizations from educating about Israel, and previously served as the director of speechwriting for Israel's permanent mission to the United Nations in New York City. She was responding to the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres calling last week for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinians after the terrorist organization Hamas launched their shocking attacks on Israel October 7th. The House of Representatives, along with 12 the House of Representatives, all Republicans, and 12 Democrats, actually, not all Republicans. Let me just read the headline. The House passed Israeli support bill with the help from 12 Democrats. This from Fox News. The House of Representatives approved sending $14.3 billion in federal aid to Israel. A 226 to 196 vote happened yesterday. 12 Democrats joined Republicans to pass it. Under the bill brought by House Republicans, that funding will be reallocated from money that was meant for the IRS in President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. Just 2 Republicans voted against the bill, Representatives Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia and Thomas Massey of Kentucky. Among the Democrats who voted in favor are Representatives Josh Gottheimer, Jared Moskowitz, Jared Golden, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and Lois Frankel, all Democrats. The Republicans celebrated the bill's passage, with the Republican Policy Committee Chairman Gary Palmer of Alabama lauding the aid to a major ally and defunding of President Biden's IRS. Quote, "Israel has every right to defend itself from the brutal attacks that we've been witnessing over the past month," said Palmer, speaking to Fox News. News of universities. The Academy this morning, Harvard and University of Pennsylvania raked in billions in federal funds. This being reported by Fox News. 2 elite universities have made headlines in recent weeks for their lackluster or non-existent response to anti-Semitism on their campuses. have raked in billions in taxpayer-backed federal funds in recent years, this according to an analysis conducted by Open the Books and provided to Fox News. Harvard University and the University of Pennsylvania found themselves embroiled in controversy over their handling of anti-Semitic incidents on campus, following the Hamas bloody attacks on Israel and the Israeli response. The issues have boiled over in recent weeks, leading to outside pressure from donors and top law firms to do more to protect Jewish students. Some politicians have even questioned whether the universities that don't do enough to restrain anti-Semitic actions on campus should have their tax-exempt statuses revoked. Harvard and UPenn, which have been among colleges at the center of the storm, have received billions in federal payments over the past 5 years and billions more in federal tax breaks on their endowments. Speaking of the economy and what goes into it, hiring has slowed, unemployment has risen. The Washington Examiner reports that the economy added just 150,000 jobs in October, reflecting a slowdown in the labor market as the Federal Reserve keeps interest rates high to bring down inflation. The headline job growth number in Friday's employment report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics was less than most economists had projected. It was also well below the September gain of 297,000 jobs after revisions. The August job creation was also revised downward, meaning that there were 101,000 fewer jobs added in those 2 months than previously thought. The unemployment rate increased by 0.1 of a percentage point to 3.9. And this morning, out of the Trump world, President Trump has attacked the legal system after his sons were forced to testify. This from CNN. It was a tough day for the Trump boys. Things grew heated when Assistant New York Attorney General Andrew Amer apparently succeeded in undermining Eric Trump's claim that he had little to do with his president father's financial statements. He said, "I was not personally aware of the statement of the financial condition." Amar then showed him an email he was sent in 2013 from the firm's former financial controller, Jeff McConney, asked him to value a property that included a supporting data spreadsheet. And then he said, "So it appears as though you actually did see a financial statement as of August 20th, 2013. Eric Trump replied, "It appears so, yes." That is today's front page on the Wells Report.